You're listening to the Call Kent podcast, where Kent C. Dodds answers questions and gives insights to software engineers like you. Now, let's hear the call.
Hi, Kent. My name is David. I'm wondering, when is a promise not good enough and I need a web worker? I just finished expensive calculations in React Performance. Why do we need a web worker instead of just wrapping the long-running function in a promise that resolves when the function completes?
And that was the call. Here's what Kent had to say.
Hey there, David. Thank you for the question. So, yes, you can definitely just use a promise to make things happen asynchronously over time. But the problem that we're solving in that particular performance workshop exercise is that it's not just that it's a long running thing, but that it's a thing that the browser needs to process a lot. And so if it were just like a network request or something, then yeah, it totally makes sense to have that be a promise. It would naturally be a promise anyway, because those are the APIs that we get from the browser. But the problem we're trying to solve is, so actually, I guess I should explain that for those listening. We have a autocomplete, or like a type ahead type of experience, or it's a combo box. So as you're typing, it's filtering these items, and we just have a lot of items to filter. And so this is a performance bottleneck, because, especially on low-end devices, because it is processing all of those items. And so even if you were to make that process asynchronous somehow, the browser main thread still has to process all of that stuff. And the problem with JavaScript in the main thread is that by specification, the browser only has a single thread to allocate to your running JavaScript, as well as what the browser is doing to update the UI. There are various reasons, historical reasons for this, and it's actually quite a nice thing for us. We don't have to worry about threads as much. But it does mean that if your JavaScript is doing a lot of work, you're going to end up with a situation where the browser is too busy doing your work to actually get its own work done. And so the solution to this is to actually create another thread, and that's what moving it into a web worker is doing. So the only reason that we actually move it from synchronous to asynchronous is because we have to use a web worker, and communication to the web worker is asynchronous. So if it weren't, we could just we'll synchronously send it to the web worker, and maybe that would be okay. Probably wouldn't. The serialization and deserialization would be a problem performance-wise. So we'd probably want it to be asynchronous anyway. But that is the API. It is asynchronous. And so we move it to a promise, but that's not the objective of the exercise. Really, the objective of the exercise is to move it to a web worker. And what that does is it says, okay, main thread that's responsible for updating the UI for what the user's supposed to see, that is free from all of the work of actually sorting the items. And so that way you can have like a different swim lane. I guess if you're not familiar with threads in computer programming, the basic idea is you could think of that as an individual person who can only do one thing at a time. And so if we have them both updating the UI and working on sorting the items, then they can get backed up. But if basically what we're doing with a web worker is we're creating a new person or hiring another person who their only job is to sort these items so that the original person can manage updating the UI. So if we were to just say, oh, well, we'll just make this asynchronous, well, that original person still needs to do the work, and so they're not freed up. We want to split this up into two different jobs. So one person could be responsible for sorting stuff, which is really expensive, and the other person can be responsible for updating the UI. Now, it is still an expensive operation, and it takes a lot of time. And so the person who's responsible for sorting that stuff, our web worker, is still really busy. And maybe there are ways that we can optimize that further. But that's actually part of the reason why it turns into an asynchronous operation as well. So the main thread can say, hey, web worker, I need you to go do this thing. And let me know when you're done. And then the web worker can do all of its stuff without causing problems for the main thread. And then when it's done, it sends that response over to the main thread. Hopefully that makes sense. Thank you for the question. This was a really great question. I think you're probably not the only one who's curious about this. Feel free to send a follow-up if you have further questions. Take care.
This has been the Call Kent podcast. Learn more about Kent at kentcdodds.com and get your own questions answered at kentcdodds.com/calls.